Listen to the wind in the junipers and the tales of the shifting, whispering sands. Wild horses on the run into the setting sun and the smell of the leather in his hand.
Hello, good to see you back. I'm Mike Pickett. I've been thinking a lot about you today, and I thought you might want to know and understand a little more about what's coming in the new world of universal commerce. Harriet Tubman was an effective instrument of the Underground Railroad that freed a lot of slaves just before and during the Civil War. Sometime later she said this. She said, quote, "I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if they'd have known they were slaves." End of quote. Such is the syndrome that hangs over all people who ignore the opportunity to be financially free by acquiring the only decentralized currency in the history of the world called Bitcoin. They don't know they're slaves because they've been slaves for as long as they can remember, enslaved by the control of their income and their personal money supply. They don't bother to look into other options because they've been indoctrinated to believe that there are none. So they fail to take advantage of the tool that can deliver them because of fear or lack of priority or motivation. A lot of people in the world do not want the responsibility of self-reliance. We have to accept that. They prefer to have the government control their social score and their welfare on government terms. It's easier to be a victim and point the finger of blame toward the government. Such people prefer banks, money managers, and government leaders to control their destiny. In short, some people would rather be victims and they'd rather be slaves. Those of us who choose to be self-reliant and responsible will emphatically disagree with such choices. But, by virtue of the very principles of freedom that we embrace, allowances have to be made for freedom of others to choose for themselves, even when we disagree with their choices. Central Bank Digital Currency, or CBDC, is the government corporate solution for serving those who would prefer not to be personally responsible for their actions or their finances. Such has become customary in societies around the world for generations. But the trust in such systems has deteriorated tremendously within the last decade or so. Now there's coming to the financial world an exchange-traded fund to be approved by Securities and Exchange Commission, to be used by BlackRock, Fidelity, and a number of other fund managers to trade Bitcoin. The use of such a system will undoubtedly be popular among a high number of citizens that cannot or do not want to take custodial responsibility for themselves. Such institutional custodians will hold the keys to private Bitcoin on behalf of owners in the same way that they hold the control of their other securities. Access to the coins will not be in the hands of the individual owners because control of the funds will be in the hands of the fund managers who will hold the keys. Unfortunately, many citizens will become trapped into a security form of ownership or CBDC simply by ignoring the alternative until it's too late and all of their resources are exhausted to the point that they are left with no other choice. Such is the nature of the natural man. Anyone who chooses to ignore warnings of coming tragedies, who refuses to read and learn for himself, who believes the lies and propaganda spewed by mainstream media, who believes that there is nothing he can do about the problems of the world, will find himself enslaved by those who would control his social score, his finances, and virtually every move he makes in the world. The control of the United States fiat money system was handed over to the bankers by an ignorant Congress and signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson in 1913. I made a video about that. It's on my website, enforcefreedom.org. It was the first form of fascism by definition. It was instituted in the United States by the Federal Reserve Act. CBDC offers an even more complete fascist system by controlling not just government funds, but also first-hand control of the movements of every person in the country. Some men and women will choose to be free and responsible, while others will choose to be governed to the point of no personal responsibility at all. They will allow themselves to be enslaved even when there is an alternative staring them in the face in the form of the private ownership of Bitcoin, the only digital asset that can be used for universal trading instead of the fiat currencies and centralized control created by alternative digital coins, governments, and international banks. Fiat is created by the issuance of debt instruments to create the money, requiring the continued sale of those debt instruments in order to pay the interest on the debt and for funding their exorbitant budgets. Tax and spend by Keynesian economics is by its nature the very definition of a Ponzi scheme. Citizens have lived under that system because they've had no other alternative until now. By the way, there's no particular reason why CBDC, Bitcoin securities, and truly decentralized ownership of Bitcoin cannot all three exist side by side. It could be called currency because it is a universal ledger entry on a verifiable blockchain verified by thousands of computers around the world that have to agree with each other, and that cannot be changed or manipulated by human hands. Bitcoin is not money. It's a universal tradable asset. Governments, banks, and fund managers can develop their own version of trading with digital currency, but they cannot stop the alternative trading of the universal asset Bitcoin. Bitcoin transactions will be taxed in the United States in the same manner as the trading of any other property, digital, secured, or material, by comparing the buying and selling activities to determine capital gains or losses. Any country that makes Bitcoin illegal will shoot themselves in the foot, because Bitcoin is worldwide and transactions can be made on the internet from anywhere. In the event that a government was to make trading by Bitcoin illegal, they'd cut themselves off from the majority of commerce that is rapidly coming to the rest of the world. No government is apt to do it. What was done by Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX was to copy the same pattern used by central bankers in the government Ponzi scheme. The main difference was that FTX had a run on their ledger and their bank collapsed for lack of the option to print money. All Ponzi schemes fail in the end, and now there's an enormous hole in the bottom of the world banking Ponzi bucket that will not just slowly drain, but it'll gush out in a virtual flood. Hence the desperate new scheme for a great reset called CBDC. Thank God and Satoshi Nakamoto for Bitcoin, a sound alternative controlled by no third-party human hands that can preserve the welfare of the common citizens of the world when the banks and the oligarchs' fascist Ponzi schemes inevitably and very soon collapse. Fund managers such as BlackRock and Fidelity will pick up the investment trend by custodial management of digital asset Bitcoin that was specifically designed to be decentralized. It will drive the price up, but it will not provide decentralized control. Any asset can be managed by custodians, but they don't have to be. Private ownership of your bicycle or your Bitcoin does not have to be managed as a security by trusting any third party. True freedom and independence are provided by individual control and responsibility of their own affairs and their own assets, and the ability to trade them freely with anyone under the common law, without civil or third-party interference. It will not matter to merchants who control the Bitcoin that they will take and trade. The easiest and most streamlined way to engage in commerce and trade is peer-to-peer, using private custody, transferring Bitcoin directly from one private wallet to another without permission or interference of any third party, whether or not it is held by a bank, government, or custodial fund manager. Not your keys, not your coins. You do not truly own your Bitcoin nor your bicycle unless you control them yourself and can move them from one place to another without permission or implementation by someone else. This is Ike Pickett, singing his way out of this podcast. I look forward to be with you again soon. The song I wrote for you that best supports this podcast is called Thank God for Nakamoto, and it goes like this. I got this job in 21 that I hoped would pay the bills. With the higher price of groceries, we can't afford the frills. The price of gas to feed my truck is climbing every day, and the interest on my mortgage makes it really hard to pay. When banks began to fail, stocks began to slide. It was harder now than ever to find a place to hide. I tried to find a place where I could put some cash away, so I looked at bank deposits and my 401k. But everything was up and down and off and on wane. I found it hard to trust the banks in Wall Street just the same. But then I found a private place to keep it to myself, and Bitcoin made for me a way to avoid financial hell. Thank God for Nakamoto, thank God that I am free. The choice I make is now my own responsibility. I'm thankful for my freedom and for my agency, knowing that my savings are in my own custody. The central banks had lost their hold on our economy. Now the bankers' Ponzi schemes were easier to see. So I bought a private wallet on a website that I found, and I socked away some Bitcoin in my private underground. I started hodling when the price was only 16K. When I looked, my Bitcoin nearly doubled. Now today, my CD almost stayed the same with 5% per year. Real inflation ate the interest, and the dollar was a bear. So now I'm sleeping well at night with Bitcoin socked away deep in my private wallet with no human hands to play. With my Bitcoin savings that's been growing, by the way, and my private keys that always keep the greedy hands at bay. Thank God for Nakamoto, thank God that I am free. The choice I make is now my own responsibility. I'm thankful for my freedom and for my agency, knowing that my savings are in my own custody. I'm thankful for my freedom and for my agency, knowing that my Bitcoin and my savings are in my own custody.
Listen to the wind in the junipers and the tales of the shifting, whispering sands. Wild horses on the run into the setting sun, and the smell of the leather in his hand.